Still looking at Chapter 2, Research Analysis, we're going to go through the steps to complete a FRAF. So before you begin this lecture, you need to go up to the where the lecture tab is, and you want to print the blank FRAF form, and then you want to also print the article that is there that is for the FRAF. And once you have those printed, then you can proceed to the next slide. So, steps for using the FRAF. The reason that we want to go through and look at how to do a FRAF is because your Unit 1 Research Part 3, you will have to complete a FRAF on your own. And then also, it's great to know about where to find these different things within an article for when you do also your Part 2 assignment. You're going to be able to have to find like the title, the key terms, the definitions, different things through an article. So this will help you learn how to go through an article and find these things. So the first things we're going to look at in our article are our title, our author. So we're going to see if it's what type of article it is or if it's an abstract. And then we're also going to review key terms and the major concepts that are listed within the article. Okay, if you pull up your article, you'll see here's the title, the authors, the abstract, and usually underneath the abstract before the paper begins, they'll have the keywords. So here's our keywords listed. Also, if you click over on these little text boxes, I've given you the listed what each of these are, the highlighted areas. So we'll see our key terms, and then if we go back up to our title, all of these key terms are listed in the title. So that's an important thing when you are doing your paper. You want to make sure that your title includes all of your key terms when you come up with the title for your paper. Next, we see our authors. And the only thing to note about the authors is whoever is the first author listed is the person who contributed the most to the actual research. Next is the abstract. The abstract is important when you're looking for articles that relate to your study, because the abstract is going to give you a short synopsis of what the article is actually about. So you want to read these to see if you want to actually go open the PDF, read the entire paper, because the entire paper could be anywhere from like 10 to 15 pages. So you don't want to waste time reading through a whole article that could take 20-30 minutes unless you know it's an article that relates to what you're wanting to find information on. Also, many times you can find your purpose for your study in your abstract. And then this actual paper actually lists the APA citation. And then if you look at the top of your FRAF, you're going to want to complete the bibliographic information from the article using APA format. So this is close to correct in APA format, but there's something that's actually wrong with it. It needs to be indented. So make sure, even if they have it listed, you still need to go to the APA Help tab in your menu bar on Blackboard and go through and use one of those links and make sure that it's cited correctly for a peer-reviewed journal. So now we're going to go back to our PowerPoint. So our next step is step 2, which will identify the research format. So we've already identified that the article that we're looking at is a research article. So it would be a peer-reviewed research article, and for your paper you're going to have at least 5 peer-reviewed research articles. You'll probably have more than that, just to be able to have a complete review of literature. Sometimes you can just find abstracts on stuff. Those are not as helpful because they don't give you all the details, but you might be able to pull something out of those. And then sometimes you can just find research reports. So you might find something that's done within the retail industry that's a research report that's not peer-reviewed, and that's something you can definitely use within your paper, especially if you want to know things about like Generation Y. You might be able to find just a research report that's done on that generation and how it affects the retail industry. Next is your bibliographic information that we already talked about, and that's where you want to put in your citation in APA format. And then we also talked about the key terms, in which we found the key terms underneath the abstract, and then the key terms were also mentioned in the title, which is an important thing to note. Next, now we're going to go find our purpose or problem statement. And this is usually listed within your introduction and lit review section, or it can also be listed in your abstract too. And so for this article, the purpose of the research was to assess the beliefs of small community consumers regarding the use of the internet for product acquisition. So now if you'll pull out your article, we'll go find where the purpose statement is within the article. So looking on the first page of the article, the purpose, as I mentioned, was listed in the abstract. But if you go down to the second page of the article, the purpose is also listed on the first highlighted section on the right. They listed the purpose. And then also, if you look on your FRAF, it says that you want to list the goal or the objective of the study, and that's the purpose. But then also they said that they were specifically interested in applying this model to the decision process, and so you might want to also include the rest of this information in here because it gives you a little more detail about the problem and what they're wanting to solve. And if for some reason you can't find the purpose, if you're doing an abstract, sometimes you might not find a purpose, but you will always should be able to find the purpose within a research article, and it should be in the introduction or lit review section. Now let's go back to our PowerPoint. So step 6 of our FRAF is that we're going to find the hypothesis within our article. And hypotheses usually use different numbered lines for each of the key terms. And the hypothesis should be stated, so you shouldn't have to make something up. And there usually is a hypothesis that will deal pretty much with each key term. So let's go to our article again and we'll find the hypothesis. And if you look on your FRAF, it says that you want to list each hypothesis, so you'll say like H1 and then you'll write out the hypothesis statement for each one. And it's real easy because usually it's already listed like H1 with the statement in your article. So looking at your article, if you scroll down to page 189, so it's the end of the literature review or introduction section, they list all the hypotheses, and they did it exactly how you want to put it on your FRAF. You want to say H1 and write out what their hypothesis was. H2, and this one had a bunch of hypotheses. Sometimes you might only have 1 or 2. But this one actually had 6. So you would write each of those in the hypothesis and research questions section of your FRAF. For step 7, you need to write the definitions for the key terms. And those key terms will be the ones that were given under the abstract, and they were also mentioned in the title. So you want to state the meaning of each of these key terms. And a lot of times not every key term will be defined within your article. And if so, for the FRAF, what you'll need to do is you want to go to an online dictionary and find a term that you think best matches, and find a definition that you think best matches that term. And the big thing you have to remember is you need to cite that definition. So if you use it word from word from that online dictionary, then you're going to need quotations and a citation. If you don't use it word for word and you paraphrase it, then you don't have to have quotations, you just have to have a citation at the end. And if you can't find a definition that you like, or there isn't a definition, then you can also just come up with your own definition. After reading the article, you can figure out what the definition for that term should be. And if you do that, at the end of the definition, you need to put an asterisk sign, just so I'll know that that's the definition that you made up and not one that needed a citation with it. So now let's go to our paper and find our definitions. So if we scroll down to the methods section, we can find in the methods where it said, for the purpose of this research study, we elected to focus on areas within the population of less than 12,500 people. So this could be your definition, as I've marked it on the little text, for small community. You could use that as, this is how the researchers defined small community for this study. Another definition that was also given was a definition for innovation. So let's move back up to page 188. And so if you look at this second sentence, it says, according to Rogers, who developed the model, innovations are any objects, ideas, or practices that individuals perceive as being new. So that's what you would use for your definition for innovation. And so for both of these, since they came from the article, you would want to cite the article as where you found your definition. So then if we go back up and look at the rest of our key terms, that means you would want to go find a definition for internet, which would be easy, then find a definitions for apparel, food, and home furnishings. And you could either make up those definitions or you could use an online dictionary to find those. Now we're going to talk about step 8 of doing your FRATH. And the step 8 of the FRATH is the review of literature. And this is where you're going to list citations of different researchers that are your main sources for the different key terms. And instead of having to write the entire citation, you're just going to do a citation where you just do the authors and the date for these. And the big thing to remember about your review of literature when you go to write it is that really your review literature is going to kind of be broken up into different sections of your key terms. So if we go look, we're going to go look at our research article again, and you'll kind of see how they broke it up into different key terms, and they talked about the different key terms, and they talked about other people's research that had done something similar within that key term and how it related to their study. So for our review of literature section, if you turn to page 185, the first two highlighted sections under the introduction or the literature review talk about online retail sales, and those were the same author, which was Forrester Research of 2001 and 2002. So that's what you would want to cite partially for, you would just, how you would do it in your literature review section is you would just write the key term online retailing or internet retailing, and then you would just list those people. Then if you turn to the next page of 186, at the top left is they're going to talk about apparel, and you would want to cite Pasteur of 2000, and you could also cite shopping.org of 2001 because they're talking about the importance of apparel as something that you would want to study. And then if you go down to the next highlighted section on page 186 on the left side, this section is talking about small community and why you would want to learn about internet access and internet use of a small community. So you would write down small community, and then you would cite this author with the date. And then another citation that you might want to use also for apparel is at the bottom left of the page. And you could cite one or two of these authors because there was a lot of information about the importance of the apparel industry and how much money they bring in each year to the economy. Then if you go to page 188, this talks about innovation. And so the main person you're going to want to cite for innovation is Rogers of 1995 because pretty much everything that they did, the model and everything was based off of him. So that is really the only thing you're going to need under innovation, because he was the one that pretty much came up with all of that. And then there's nothing really cited within the paper for food or home furnishings, so you don't have to list those in your lit review. Now we're going to talk a little bit about coding terms. And this is when you're doing your lit review, and how we just highlighted the different sections for the lit review, the main authors for those. When you're actually going through and trying to find articles to put in your literature review, this is a great thing you can do, is you can highlight the different sections and then mark if it's for, which key term it's for. And if you find an article that deals specifically with just one key term, then mark that on the article and then put it in a specific folder, just so you can keep track of everything and track of which articles go with what and where you're going to use them in your literature review. So this is just more of just a little tip how to keep up with things when you actually start working on your paper in your literature review. Now we're going to look at step 9. And step 9 looks at the methodology, and there's going to be 3 different little sections that go along with the methods and procedures on your FRAF. So the first section is going to be the sample, the second is going to be the instrument, and then the third will be your method of analysis. Looking at your sample, the sample is the number of people or things in the study. It describes your subjects, and it tells how they were selected. You also use it to describe the population they represent. So let's go take a look at our sample. And the things we're going to want to find out about our sample for our FRAF are the number of subjects. Then you want to describe the subjects and how they were selected, and the population the subjects represent. So this is going to be under the method sections on page 90 of the article. And if we want to find out about our subjects, we look to see that our subjects are coming from, if we look under the second highlighted section on the right, it says, for the purpose of this research, our subjects will be in areas with populations of less than 12,500, and then we know the actual states or region that all of the subjects came from, so we can also add that in. And then also another, if you look on page 191 at the top left, we can also find out about the subjects that they were the adult in the household doing the most shopping, and those were the ones that were asked to complete the questionnaire. So that just describes our subjects a little bit more. And then if we want to talk about how our subjects were selected, they were selected off of a directory-based mailing list, which consisted of 8,085 heads of households from 11 states, is what you would want to list for that. And then we've already kind of talked about the population of who these subjects represent. Then we also want to tell how many of the subjects were used. So the number of subjects, if you go to Table 1, Demographic Characteristics of Respondents, you can see the N. N is the list of the number of subjects that were within the study. So that's one of the places that you can find the N. Now we're going to look at Step 9, which is the instrument. And the instrument is on the Part B part of your FRAF. And you want to explain what procedure was used to collect the data. So the first thing you say, it was a quantitative study because they did a survey, and we know that's quantitative, and we know that they measured their key terms. However, in your book it says that you need to go through and you need to list each key term to each hypothesis and then the measure that was used. We're not going to do that. That's a little too in-depth. So I'm going to show you what you're going to want to include under the Part B instrument section of your FRAF. But we're going to look at that on the article. So if you pull up your article, if you scroll down to page 191 and you look under instrument, this is what we're going to want to include under Part B. We want to say that a 35-point Likert item scale was used, And there was 21 questions that looked at Rogers' innovation characteristics. There was 5 questions that looked at perceived risk. And then we also want to mention that the rest of the questions looked at demographic information that included age, sex, and you want to list all of those out. So that's all we're going to say underneath our instrument prototype part B. Next is step 9 is the method of analysis, which is going to be the part C of your FRAP. And this provides the statistical test or qualitative methods for the data. And we're not going to arrange it by key term. We're just going to state what statistical methods were actually done to find all the in-depth hypothesis information. So if you come over to your article, you're going to scroll down to page 192, and you're going to go to hypothesis testing. And underneath hypothesis testing, the first highlighted area says that univariate analysis of variance was used to determine which dependent variables were responsible for significant multivariate effects. So that's what you're going to want to fill in for part C. Also, as I mentioned earlier, the amount of usable questionnaires, we found it within that chart. But then it was also listed on page 192, the first highlighted section on the left. It said usable questionnaires returned were 2,198. You could even mention that there was 760 men and 1,408 women who completed the survey. Now we'll look at step 10, which is results, and that's the products of the data analysis, and this is where the raw data is organized by each hypothesis. And in quantitative, you'll have raw statistical data shown in tables, and in qualitative, you'll have photographs, written logs, or transcripts, and oral histories. So if we go to our article, if you go to the results section, is usually where you're going to find everything on your results. And so if we look at this first table, it lists all the demographic results. And then if you look down here in the article, it'll give you little explanations of what the main findings were of the demographic information. And then it'll also tell you what they found out from their hypothesis testing. And it showed that there was no significant differences related to the state of residence. So you can list some of these findings too in the results. Next is your conclusions and implications. And your conclusions are just the meaning of each result, and they'll relate to your hypothesis, and they address each key term or hypothesis. And this is where you're going to include a statement if the hypothesis was accepted, rejected, or conditional under certain circumstances. So let's go to our article and see where to find these. So if you go to your article and you look under hypothesis testing on page 191, it'll tell you at the bottom, it'll say hypothesis 1, and underneath it'll tell you if it was accepted or rejected. So for this section, what you're going to want to do is say H1, and say H1, you want to just condense what it says. You want to say H1 looked at the characteristics of an innovation to see if it facilitates or impedes adoption, and you would say it was accepted. Then you would want to go to your second hypothesis, and then you would also want to just paraphrase it and say if it was accepted or rejected. So you just want to say small community consumers who shopped for the 3 products perceived internet shopping to be less risky than non-purchasers. So you would say it was accepted. And you would want to go through each of the 6 hypotheses for the conclusion section. Next is the implications section, which is right below conclusions. And in implications, you want to describe the way the conclusions might be used. So it's the specific use or application of them. And also you want to look at how the conclusions might influence a sample's decision in personal life, group, or business. And it often discusses an action plan for individuals or businesses or groups to take. So let's go to the article and look at these. So our first implication would be the second highlighted section on the right side of the page, and it talks about how educational programming can be directed at helping small community consumers as well as others make the most of using internet as a means for gaining access. So remember, our implications describe ways that the conclusions might be used. So educational programming, here's another one right underneath that. And then also this is another one on education. So you just want to go through and say how they've talked about how you can do different educators and retailers can use these different things. And you can look at all the ones that are listed. Then looking at step 12, that's your recommendations for further study. And this is recommendations you would give if the study was to be repeated. And that it would be listing all the changes that could be made to your research study to make it better. And so if your researcher does not list any in the study on the FRAF, then you can just come up with a few and you just want to mark them with an asterisk to let me know that you came up with them. But we'll go look at our study. They list one recommendation and we'll look at that. So if you go to your article and you look on page 193, the recommendation is going to be on the on the right column at the top, and it says further researchers might test the hypothesis on other product categories and adoption of other innovations in other cultures. So that's their recommendation for further study. So that's what you would want to list in that section. So this concludes the lecture on how to use a FRAF. If you have other questions, please email me or do your question and answer session for Unit 1. Thank you.